The day my uncle died felt like a slow door closing. He had been a quiet man, salt of the earth, the kind who fixed a neighbor's fence without asking for anything in return. He and I shared Sundays rebuilding an old shed behind his house, cups of bitter coffee, and a habit of watching late-season baseball on a tiny television he kept under a stack of newspapers. When he passed, the hollow felt enormous but simple. Grief, funerals, words said in hallways. I did not expect the fight to come after the prayers. A week after the funeral, my cousin Elena called and said there were new papers. "He's left the house to my kids," she said, fast and almost apologetic. I remember the way her voice danced around a name that used to be said with affection. Uncle Michael's will, she explained, had been updated. My stomach did a peculiar little flip. I had always thought that the house, the sagging porch, the maple tree with the tire swing, belonged to Michael's memory. He had told me once, with a crooked smile, "You've kept my tools from rusting." He'd said it in a way that made joking possessiveness a kind of confession. I'd walked that property with him, measured joists, replaced a roof shingle. His will had always been honest between us. The house to me, small savings to be split, and a note about his cat if anything happened. When Elena delivered news in a legal tone, something quieted inside me. At the probate office, I asked to see the will. The clerk smiled with the neutral kindness of bureaucracy and handed me a stamped envelope. There were 2 documents inside. One older will, signed and dated in my uncle's careful hand, and a second, newer one with a different handwriting and a shaky signature dated after his death. My throat tightened. I read the old one again until the words blurred, then looked at the newer version. It named Elena and her children as beneficiaries and omitted me entirely. I remember the precise coldness of that moment, how the kitchen ceiling looked like an accusation. I did the thing people told themselves not to do. I let anger pulse. Not the hot animal anger that leads to breaking things, but a slow burn that tastes like betrayal. This wasn't just about property. It felt like erasure. Someone had taken the story my uncle and I had lived and rewritten it without us. I drove to the house that night, sat on the sagging porch where we'd once fixed a step together, and felt very small. I promised under my breath I wouldn't let a forged sentence become my uncle's last truth. At first I tried to be reasonable. Maybe there had been a valid change, I told myself. Families change arrangements for many reasons. New marriages, health concerns, even rivalry. I called Elena, who resisted my requests for details with rehearsed calm. "It's probate," she said. "Things happen." But the new will had a date I knew impossible. My uncle was in hospice on that day and barely coherent. I had been with him. I could still hear his breathing in my ears, raw and thin. The image of a legal document signed while a man lay dying felt like an affront to his life. I found an old shoebox of receipts and letters among Michael's things because grief makes you foolishly believe you'll find everything if you look hard enough. The letters were small things. A grocery list scribbled in the margins, a postcard with a fishing spot marked, and a single folded paper that sent a cold up my spine. Inside was a typed will, initialed and dated a year earlier. Clear, blunt, and intended. He'd left the house to me, for the care of the property and the cat. The kind of domestic clause only family writes. There was no ambiguity. I held that paper like a salvaged flag. Next I found Mrs. Holcomb, an 80-something neighbor who looked at me with a soft suspicion of people who have seen families fall apart. She remembered watching my uncle sign the earlier will at the kitchen table while I was there. She'd run an errand and come back to clap eyes on the scene. "He told me himself," she said, clutching my hand as if to push memory into me. Others stepped forward. Men who'd seen the will discussion on a porch bench. A handyman who had mended the fence while my uncle and I argued about paint colors. Their recollections were small, human things that threaded together. A cigarette placed on the table, a newspaper folded at a certain page, the exact watch my uncle wore. These were not legal arguments but texture, the stuff of a life. When Elena learned people were talking, her tone went sharp. She explained away memories, muttered about grief's messy aftermath, and implied that families sometimes disagree. The implication that I hadn't earned what Uncle Michael had promised me felt like salt. I sat with Lisa, my partner, and she guided the first practical steps. "Get everything documented," she said. "Get copies, names, dates. Don't go by memory." Lisa made lists like a surgeon prepping for the worst. It was ordinary, practical intimacy that steadied me as the edges of my world began to fray. I hired an attorney named Dalton who had a reputation for being patient and good with elder law cases. He listened without blinking when I explained the timing of the will and the witnesses who remembered the earlier bequest. "We start with evidence," he said, as if it were a recipe. "Names, dates, handwriting analysis if necessary, and chain of custody for documents." The phrase, chain of custody, sounded like something from an old courtroom drama. In my mouth it felt like armor. We collected what we could. Dalton subpoenaed bank records showing withdrawals from my uncle's account that seemed to line up with Elena's household expenditures. A local notary was located who remembered signing a document but noted the time seemed wrong. We had testimony from neighbors and a handyman's receipt with my uncle's initials. Each small item felt like a brick to lay under a shaky foundation. I learned the vocabulary of proof: affidavit, probate, executor, beneficiary. It was tedious and mechanical, typing and telephoning and printing, but it felt like doing justice in the most available way. Meanwhile, cousins gathered at the funeral home for other reasons: dinner, gossip, obligation, and the room felt like a theater where actors shuffled roles. Elena smiled in a way that looked practiced when she saw me consult with Dalton. "You'll just make things harder," she told me once, low enough not to be overheard. Threats were a strange domestic thing. They often came wrapped in concern. I did not answer. Instead, I sat with Mrs. Holcomb and other neighbors who'd been quiet before and asked them to record statements. Mrs. Holcomb wrote slowly but with gravity, and when she handed the paper to Dalton, she looked at me like someone who'd handed over something sacred and dangerous at once. As we prepared for probate, I felt the odd mixture of being on the right side of history and the discomfort of making private grief public. You don't expect a life's last directives to become a public file. I had imagined the house empty and my uncle's presence like a scent in the air, a small, constant comfort. Instead, his memory was under negotiation, and I had to present him as an actor in a legal play. That felt intrusive and necessary all at once. The first hearing was dizzying in its ordinariness: the hum of fluorescent lights, the courthouse carpet, the judge's robes that made everyone around him feel somehow smaller and more polite. Elena sat like a queen of small compromises, 2 children at her side. She argued the newer will was valid. Her lawyer spoke in soft, confident cadences about changed circumstances and new intentions. I listened, feeling like a man whose life was being condensed into paragraphs and footnotes. The judge, a lean woman who spoke with patience, asked for evidence and witnesses. She reminded us all that probate is less about drama and more about facts. Dalton called Mrs. Holcomb first. She spoke slowly, carefully, and when she confirmed she had witnessed my uncle sign the earlier will, I felt air come out of my chest like a held breath. Then Jonah, the handyman, took the stand and described the days we'd spent fixing the fence and the conversation about passing the property on to me. It was not flashy testimony. It was neighborly memory presented with the seriousness of law. The defense lawyer tried to poke holes, suggesting memory can be faulty and that grief distorts. That felt like insult layered on complicity. At one point, Elena's lawyer produced the newer document and argued that my uncle had been of sound mind when he signed it. The handwriting looked shaky, and there were questions about the signature's provenance. Dalton requested a handwriting analysis and an audit of withdrawals from the estate account that had occurred after the death. Those withdrawals, he suggested, mapped onto an unusual shift in who had access to the account. The judge granted more time and set a date for additional hearings. We left the courthouse tired but oddly fortified. The public nature of the process surprised me. Neighbors I didn't know offered sympathetic looks as we descended the steps, and I felt the strange consolation of community bearing witness. Back home, Lisa and I sat late into the night cross-referencing dates and receipts. I found solace in ritual. She made soup, I printed documents, and we sorted piles of paper into labeled folders like archaeologists piecing together a lost life. The work grounded me, and in it I found a quiet resolve. This was not just about a house. It was about honoring a man who had been too modest to make his affairs simple for others to exploit. Discovery revealed oddities that felt less like coincidence and more like design. Bank statements showed automatic transfers to a joint account holding Elena's name, with dates coinciding with times my uncle had been in the hospital. There were checks written for household expenses that matched receipts for furniture placed in Elena's home. It wasn't dramatic in the cinematic sense. It was a ledger of small misappropriations that, summed together, looked like theft by attrition. Dalton's face when he showed me the spreadsheet was stoic but fierce. They tried to reframe it as benevolence, he said. But money has its own handwriting. When we presented these findings, Elena's side argued plausible deniability. He wanted to support family, her lawyer said. He had said things differently at times. It was an argument built on the idea that an elder's wishes can be fluid, that love can be found in last-minute generosity. The judge asked for more specific proof. We produced grocery receipts, credit card charges, and eyewitness testimony that indicated these purchases were billed to the estate during a time when my uncle could not have authorized them. The judge frowned, and I felt a thin thread of vindication. People's reactions were a mixed bag. Some members of the extended family peeled away like onion layers, worried about being implicated or having to take sides. Others called to express shock and a quiet kind of solidarity. "If he wanted you to have it, he'd have told you plainly," one aunt said. It was strange to be told what my uncle would have wanted, as if I did not know him. The most wrenching moments were the snide remarks, whispers from distant relatives who assumed a greedy motive on my part. The truth was simpler and more painful, the loss of a man's voice in making final choices. One afternoon, Elena confronted me in the probate office parking lot, the sunlight making her eyes bright and thin. "You think you own a piece of him," she said, voice shaking with a mix of anger and grief. I told her no, I thought I owned nothing but a promise. The conversation dissolved into recriminations about loyalty and obligation, each of us naming slights that had happened over the years. It was ugly and human and left me feeling both exhausted and more resolved. If the fight came down to preserving the clarity of Michael's intentions, then I would see it through. We brought in an independent handwriting expert. The analysis, when it came, was damning. The signature on the newer will contain strokes inconsistent with my uncle's habitual hand and pressure patterns that suggested it had been traced or completed by someone else. The expert explained methodically how small muscular habits, how a person lifts their pen, the curve of the M, are like fingerprints. Seeing that report felt like a blow that was also a relief. It was proof that the signature was not wholly his, that the document's authenticity was at least in serious doubt. Elena's side countered with its own witnesses, neighbors who swore they had seen my uncle handling paperwork late in life, a friend who said Michael had made offhand remarks about changing his accommodations. The courtroom became a space of competing memories. Memory is a strange commodity in court. It carries conviction but is fragile under scrutiny. I watched as whole afternoons were spent comparing calendars, hospital records, and nurse logs. Each cross-reference tightened the narrative. When Dalton pointed out that a particular endorsement had been made on a day my uncle was sedated, the room went quiet. The defense scrambled to explain scheduling errors and miscommunications. During recess, an older niece approached me and confessed that she had been offered a small sum to sign a document and had refused. She said she'd been too frightened to come forward earlier. Her voice broke when she described how Elena had been insistent, charming as a snake with a velvet mouth. Her testimony slotted into the larger mosaic of manipulation. It was not simply one greedy act, it felt orchestrated, steps taken to exploit timing, confusion, and vulnerability. That night, back on the porch where Michael's tire swing still creaked in the breeze, I realized how complicated justice is. The legal system could point to falsified signatures and suspicious withdrawals, but it could not bring back the quiet afternoons we'd spent reading the paper together. It could not restore the unrecorded conversations or the small private jokes. Still, it could prevent those memories from being overwritten by a fabricated document. I felt the gravity of what we were doing. Not vengeance, but restoration. As the trial deepened, public sympathy shifted in our favor. Local reporters who'd once treated the matter as a family squabble began to ask pointed questions about elder exploitation. Articles ran with sober headlines about wills and rightful heirs, and a few community advocacy groups reached out to offer assistance. That attention made some relatives uncomfortable. They began to avoid family gatherings as if proximity might force their hands. For me, the attention was an awkward mix of validation and invasion. Michael's life, once private in its small rituals, had become a cautionary tale. One witness provided a piece of the puzzle that felt decisive. A notary who had notarized the later document admitted under questioning that the paper had been brought to her in a rush, late in the afternoon, and that the signature placement seemed odd. She confessed she had felt uneasy but had been persuaded by Elena's insistence. In court, she apologized softly to the judge. Her contrition felt human and heavy. It punctured the defense's story of voluntary generosity. The cumulative weight of evidence, bank records, witness statements, handwriting analysis, and the notary's admission, began to shape a clearer picture. Elena grew visibly strained in the courtroom. The confident mask she wore in family photos cracked in quiet moments. She began to lash out in ways that betrayed fear. Sharp words whispered in hallway corners, passive-aggressive social media posts about respecting the dead. Our private history turned public, and the display hurt. There were painful evenings when I would find old photos of Michael on the mantel and think of how small and complex lives are when reduced to pages in a file. I never wanted this to be spectacle. I wanted honesty. The judge eventually ordered a temporary injunction on the estate, preventing any transfers until the matter was resolved. It was a bureaucratic safety valve that felt like a small salvation. For a moment, the house stopped being a contested object and became instead a place paused, waiting for truth. We organized a small group of neighbors to check the property and make sure nothing was moved. That felt humble and necessary, guarding not only timber and brick but also the memory of a man who'd taught me how to fix a leaky roof and the quiet dignity of steady labor. Settlement offers began to arrive. Some came with strings, non-disclosure clauses, apologies that smelled like legal counsel rather than remorse. Elena's lawyer suggested mediation, arguing that it would spare the family further pain. I wrestled with the idea. Settlement could be quicker and less expensive than a full court resolution, but it might also allow a fabricated narrative to survive in some form. Lisa and Dalton talked me through it. What did I want, and what was worth holding out for? The question of dignity kept surfacing. Was it enough to have compensation, or did I want the record set straight? I decided I wanted the record. I wanted the judge's opinion to reflect the truth so that others would not be left with shadowed choices about elderly estates. We declined shallow settlements and pushed forward. The courtroom became a place where small acts mattered. The notary's recollection, Mrs. Holcomb's steady voice, the auditor's detailed tracing of funds. Each contribution made the mosaic less fragile. The judge's patience was important. She often paused, asked clarifying questions, and made sure the vulnerable had a voice. On a humid afternoon, a surprise witness arrived. A nurse who had worked night shifts in the hospice and remembered cataloging my uncle's visitors. She testified that he'd been too drowsy to sign documents the day the newer will claimed he had executed it. Her testimony was not dramatic, but her presence filled an evidentiary gap. The defense tried to undermine her reliability, citing the chaos of hospital life. But the judge listened closely, and Dalton's cross-examination revealed a pattern of visits timed suspiciously around financial transactions. The courtroom's slow gears began to turn toward clarity. After weeks of testimony, the case felt less like two sides arguing and more like a community telling a story, one that would not be erased. The final arguments loomed, and with them a strange sense of closure wrapped in anxiety. I tried to sleep normally, to do small household tasks, to be a person rather than a plaintiff. Lisa and I watered the flowerbed Michael had loved and found that tending life was another form of resistance to the theft of meaning. The little things, watering, sweeping, calling an old friend, sustained me as the trial reached its end. The closing arguments were quietly theatrical. Dalton walked the court through a timeline. Phone calls, hospital notes, visits, and transfers. He juxtaposed the handwritten will I had found in Michael's box against the shaky, suspect verses of the newer document and the notary's admission. He spoke not with rage, but with a kind of sorrow that seemed to make the judge lean in. Elena's counsel countered with stories about family need and alleged last-minute reconciliations. The theater of legal language felt oddly disproportionate to the deep domestic sorrow underpinning it. When the judge rendered her decision, she did so with a slow clarity. She found the newer document lacked the necessary indicia of authenticity and that the bank transaction suggested an improper use of estate funds. She ruled the older will valid and ordered the estate to be administered according to my uncle's expressed wishes. The judge also mandated that any transfers made after death be reversed and referred the matter to the county attorney for potential further action if fraud were substantiated. The relief that rose in me was both immediate and complex. A victory felt less like a fanfare and more like a solemn writing. Outside the courtroom, Elena stood with her children and watched. She did not scream or faint. She simply let the world tilt under her for a moment. Some relatives hugged me with awkward warmth. Others avoided my glance. Mrs. Holcomb came to the courthouse steps, and we embraced like two people who had kept a secret safe by telling it out loud. The house, for a time, felt like it belonged again to memory rather than to a contested ledger. The legal recognition restored not just property but a truth that mattered to the way Michael had lived. Yet victory brought new work. The reversal of transfers was bureaucratic and slow. There were bank meetings, document filings, and a gentle, persistent suspicion that the estate had been diminished more than we knew. We found small gaps and had to pursue them. It was as if the act of proof opened further veins that needed tending. Still, the judge's ruling felt like a beacon, an institutional acknowledgement that exploitation, even in families, is wrong. Life after probate was quieter in tone. The house required repairs, more than I'd expected, but those tasks felt like a continuation of the relationship my uncle and I had shared. Each repaired shingle and repainted room was a conversation resumed. I set aside a small fund from the estate to restore the shed where we'd worked and bought a weatherproof box to store important documents. There was a practical joy in preservation, and in that work I found healing. Some family ties were irrevocably frayed. Elena and I did not speak beyond necessary logistics. There were muttered threats and an undercurrent of shame on her side. On the other hand, neighbors and friends who had supported me drew closer. Dinners were once again simple rhythms rather than awkward rituals of obligation. I started hosting a monthly meetup at the house for people in the neighborhood who wanted to know how to protect elders from financial abuse. The support group was small and humble, but it felt like turning pain into prevention. I also discovered an odd ambivalence toward money. The account had been smaller than expected after the reversals and legal fees, but it was enough to patch the roof and hire someone to fix the porch. We used part of the funds to create a small trust for the neighborhood cat, ensuring she had food and a vet visit on schedule. That felt tender and absurd in equal measure, arranging a fund for a cat named Rusty in the name of a man who'd once joked about teaching me to fish. The gesture was a small piece of making right. Emotionally, the years that followed involved careful repair. I learned to greet the house without flinching at memories turned bitter. I hosted dinners with neighbors, told stories about Uncle Michael's terrible coffee, and kept a photograph on the mantel that smiled like a testimony. The wounds remained. Occasional hurt flared when I thought of Elena, but they no longer directed my days. The effort to restore truth had become part of the community's language. People came to me with questions about wills, about how to get paperwork in order, about how to support elderly relatives. Turning our fight into a resource felt like a fitting legacy. Update. Months later, the neighborhood workshops had a steady rhythm. We met in the living room with tea and a whiteboard and talked about power of attorney, notarization, and how to spot sudden changes in an elder's documents. People brought questions and awkward family stories, and we solved some with referrals to legal aid. I sometimes thought of Michael watching from a porch in the sky and smiled. The work felt practical and small, and I liked that. It was the kind of justice that stayed quiet and effective. Elena moved away after the probate concluded, taking her children to a town a few hours' drive away. We heard she'd remarried months later. The news landed like a dry leaf. I did not feel triumph or malice, mostly a sense of distance. The community, however, remained engaged. We formed an informal hotline. Neighbors agreed to check in weekly on elders living alone and to keep copies of important documents with trusted parties. The trust was modest but real. In a small way, a wrong that had been done produced structures that might prevent future harm. On an ordinary Sunday, I fixed the tire swing, painted a faded birdhouse, and listened to Lisa hum while she made a soup my uncle used to like. The house smelled of broth and warm wood, ordinary comforts that had been threatened but survived. I taught a young neighbor how to file a simple will packet and felt that the knowledge passing felt more valuable than any single court victory. While I never stopped missing my uncle's chuckle, I felt admiration for how small acts, watching over a person, saving documents in a drawer, had changed the arc of our neighborhood safety.